I couldn't be more delighted to introduce someone who I've known and for whose work I've been a real fan for more than a decade. Many of you may have come to know Douglas Gayton, as I did, through his organization, the Lexicon of Sustainability, whose simple task was to create a vocabulary around sustainability, which he presented via a collection of his beautiful photography of farmers, production fields, farmers markets, restaurants, and more. The goal was to help people pay closer attention to how they eat, what they buy, and where their responsibility begins for creating a healthier and more regenerative food system. Always evolving, always observing where there is lack and addressing that, Douglas's newest venture via the Lexicon is REGEN 1, a food systems accelerator with the intention of strengthening local food systems and creating greater consumer awareness and dedicated purchasing power. Currently with a Northern California focus, REGEN 1 plans to accomplish that by developing a series of tools to help farmers and ranchers receive price premiums that reflect their investments in a transition from conventional to regenerative farming practices. I am so grateful that the Regenerative Rising audience has this opportunity to hear from Douglas and his team about this incredible initiative on this panel, Regenerative Convergence, a place-based multi-stakeholder approach. Welcome, Douglas.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. And I would like to start by first sharing a few thoughts about what regenerative is. People often talk about regenerative agriculture and its benefits, and we know that it regenerates our soils, but it also regenerates our communities. It regenerates cultures and farmers. And with those farming practices, even maintains that link to the traditions that first brought farmers onto our lands. It regenerates cities, especially if we think that by 2050, 70% of the people on the planet are going to live in urban areas. We're going to need to learn how to support people in cities with an agriculture that is closer to them and that they can support. And lastly, it regenerates our spirit. REGEN 1 is an accelerator that is focused on building an evidence-backed, place-based, market-driven initiative to scale agriculture in Northern California. And Elizabeth, while it was really nice to hear those really kind words about the work of the Lexicon, I really have to say that REGEN 1 is not the Lexicon's work. It's the work of a group of people that have assembled and worked very, very diligently over the past 8 months, all with a shared purpose. And in order to give you a deeper understanding of a tremendous range of people that are working on this project, I'd like to ask all of you to take out your phones and if you have your phone available, to take a picture of the screen because it'll actually become important later. So if you have your phone, just take it out and snap a picture of what you see there on the screen. And if you don't have a chance to do that, we'll come back to a little bit later. So what is REGEN 1? REGEN 1 is an accelerator that we created. And the idea was, could we take the principles of regenerative agriculture, which are a set of universal principles, and could we acknowledge that the fact that their application is place-based, and could we create a market-driven model to support that? And the reason why, Elizabeth, I say it's not just the Lexicon or one person, why it's so many people, because you'll quickly see that in order to create an evidence-backed, place-based, market-driven model for a region to support it, it wasn't just one individual or a group. It takes many people across the entire value chain, and it takes many people. And this isn't even all of them. What would lead them to work for 6 months on something, not getting paid, working, sometimes even daily, getting together. It's because they realize that the time is now. Coming out of COVID, I think we all recognize that the first thing that people are going to do is connect to their communities. And invariably, that means a reconnection that's based in food. And these people realize that coming out of COVID, we are going to have a chance to reboot people's relationships with their food systems, to reframe it, to reframe what it means to make conscious purchasing, what you want to support, and who you want to support, and what that support results in. We're going to hear many definitions about regenerative agriculture. We're certainly not here to settle that debate. This group has 5 core principles that they feel that regenerative agriculture supports. It builds healthy soils, reduces air pollution, conserves water, increases biodiversity, and it can promote equity. It does all those things while also simultaneously storing carbon. So this is the formula of Regen 1. And those are the 3 columns that I'd like to have the group that's gathered from the Regen 1 share with you. To start with, we want to talk about a model that's evidence-backed. We put together a measurements group that included land trusts, RCDs, extension agents, people from everything from the CSA, the Colorado State's Common Farm Tool, to the Healthy Soils Initiative in California, universities like UC Davis, places like Point Blue Conservation, all working on an evidence-backed model. And to share more about what this group is doing, I'd like to first outline the core ideas that they focused on as a group. One is, how could they come up with a model for regenerative that was respectful of all certifications? How could they, instead of focusing on practices, show how you could focus on outcomes? How could they value all ecosystem service benefits, the 5 of which principally I outlined earlier? And lastly, what role does the measure of carbon have in that? And so to really kick off the conversation, I'd like to start by inviting Chelsea Carey from Point Blue Conservation to answer this question. Really, is your work began with the principle that regenerative agriculture may be universal, but its application is place-based. How does the application of these principles vary from farm to farm? And why is this adaptive model so important?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Douglas, and hi, everyone. There are a number of principles for regenerative agriculture. Some of these include embracing diversity and enhancing ecosystem and community resilience. These principles are they're broad enough that they can be used as universal guides, right? These are things we want to encourage across the board and can rely on to help build a global agricultural and food system that is that's part of the solution, right? But how they take shape is gonna vary from system to system or farm to farm, right? What you might do in a Midwest cornfield to achieve your regenerative goals for social and ecological outcomes is going to be very different than what you might do on a semi-arid rangeland in California. Even within a land use type or region, what is going to work and what is appropriate or feasible for a given operation will and arguably should differ, right? So that's one reason for this place-based approach. Another is that, in addition to different actions that are appropriate or feasible, what can be expected from regenerative stewardship in terms of how much change you can make on a particular piece of land. So for example, how much carbon you can sequester, for instance, will be influenced by natural ecosystem boundaries. So things like climate and soil texture. Our landscapes, our ecosystems, they're not homogeneous, right? So we can't expect what success looks like to also be homogeneous, right? It's variable. So both of these speak to why, regenerative agriculture is going to benefit from this place-based perspective as we scale it, not only in sort of actions to achieve principles, but expectations for the outcomes.
Thanks, Chelsea. It's a challenge to take a model and make it outcome-based, because how do you actually define an outcome? the measurement group looked at, a mix of quantitative and qualitative approaches to measurement. Wendell Gilgert, who spent 3 decades at NRCS and later at Point Blue Conservation, was really instructive to us from the very outset about what he looks at when he walks the land. Wendell, why is qualitative measurement so important when people usually think about all the things that they could be measuring and all the tools they can be using for measurement? What is the role that qualitative measurement can play?
Yeah, just to balance that a bit, qualitative and quantitative. So most science that we think about is quantitative or empirical science, and it's got controls, it's got treatments, plot replication, rigorous statistical analysis, and that's always going to be the standard for scientific research. But qualitative measurements, also known as observational science, can be practiced by any trained or interested person. So not only does the place where you are looking at these measurements matter, but changes can occur from farm to farm. So getting out and walking and reading the land are really what I consider to be, at the core of observational science. And when you do that, you use all 5 of your senses, sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. You engage in order to ascertain land health. So, how does the soil feel under your feet? Somewhere between spongy and hard. What do your crops' roots look like? Are they bare? Are they white? Are they pink? Are they brown? Or are they covered with soil that look like have a dreadlock appearance? And if you take a pea-sized soil sample and you place it in a water bottle cap, does it break down or does it hold its structure over time? What can be heard? What kinds, types, varieties of birds, frogs, insects, especially pollinators present, and what do they represent? Are there multiple age classes of native trees and shrubs represented on the land? Are representative vegetative functional groups like mosses, ferns, sedges, rushes, grasses, trees, forbs present? So there are an array of observations that are reliable indicators of land health, including functional water and nutrient cycles, energy flow, succession, pollination, photosynthesis. So with time, mentoring and training, observational science is a real and valuable and reliable surrogate for empirical science.
Chelsea, you touched on outcomes briefly. Maybe you could just go a little bit deeper to explain to the group why you focus on outcomes and the principles connected to those outcomes as opposed to practices.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So, outcomes that are often prioritized in regenerative agriculture, you highlighted some of them, Douglas, like things like healthy food, clean and abundant water, healthy soils, right? And then also the principles that are used to guide action towards these outcomes, they're going to be much more universal than the practices that can or should be used to help achieve them. So that's not to say that like healthy soil, for instance, as an outcome is, it might not look the same everywhere, right? So it could look a bit different from one place to the next, but ultimately regenerative stewardship hopes to foster whatever, that outcome looks like for a particular place within those ecosystem boundaries that I mentioned before. So how these outcomes are achieved, though, is going to vary. You cannot promote or focus on a single practice to achieve the same regenerative outcome or goal across the board. And, I would argue that nor should you. Ranchers and farmers instead have like many practices or tools in their toolbox from which they can pull. Scientists and farmers and ranchers are working hard every day to find and demonstrate additional practices that can help to achieve these outcomes. And expand this tool set. And, there are policy mechanisms in place or being put in place to help support the implementation of these practices. But at the end of the day, it's up to the user to determine which practice is going to help them achieve the goals that they've established for achieving whatever regenerative outcomes they're working towards.
Thanks, Chelsea. Wendell, you were talking, Jessica, when we talk about certifications, they're usually connected to practices. There's even some certifications that are looking at regenerative. How does Regen 1 look at certifications in terms of the work that it's doing?
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. And yeah, Douglas, basically, I think the way we see Regen 1 is that it's an all-inclusive pathway to regenerative. Certifications are really great because they tell us a lot about where a grower is on their pathway to regenerative. And just knowing that they have that certification provides us with a suite of information about their management, which significantly reduces the burden of questions that we need to ask them in the onboarding process. Growers have paperwork fatigue. And not to mention, certifications offer a layer of validation, which provides assurance to the marketplace that their investment is actually translating into a transition of acreage. All that said, regenerative is really less a suite of practices, as you've heard already, and more a suite of outcomes. And as Chelsea mentioned, what works in one context and the impact it has, the time span that happens in is going to vary from farm to farm, from ranch to ranch. And so Regen 1 also allows growers and or their partner technical assistance providers they may be working with to provide actual verification of impact. So CO2 equivalents sequestered, gallons of water infiltrated, improvement in species diversity. As Wendell mentioned, we can use quantitative and or qualitative data on those 5 key outcomes that Douglas referenced and provide an additional layer of fidelity to the marketplace. But the overall goal really is just to meet growers where they are at and provide many roads to regenerative, certification being one of them.
You know, Wendell, when people talk about regenerative agriculture, if you go to a dinner party and you say that you're working on a project that relates to regenerative agriculture, they'll immediately say, "Oh yeah, that's the whole thing about carbon sequestration and carbon." We haven't really talked about that much. Where does carbon sequestration fit within this measurement evidence backed model that we're using?
Well, it's really, carbon sequestration is really an important outcome, and not just from a climate change mitigation standpoint, but in adapting to climate change. It's an essential regeneration process and building resilience. But it's also just one of a suite of a whole lot of outcomes that regenerative management can provide. So as important as carbon sequestration is, there are numerous other co-benefits that accrue when regenerative agriculture is practiced. So improved water and nutrient cycling, effective energy flow, maintaining and improving biodiversity. Well, that's a huge one in California. Enabling healthy trophic levels, food webs. So, people are concerned because insect populations around the world are crashing. And, in my view, bugs drive the system. If you don't have bugs, biodiversity is hamstrung. Robust photosynthesis, are those plants actually taking that sun and actually turning it into sugars and leaking it into the soil through the roots? Functional plant community succession, effective pollination services. Those are some of the many co-benefits that are outcomes of regenerative agriculture and are on equal or on par with carbon sequestration.
I think it might be case, Wendell, where carbon sequestration can be the entryway for somebody who's just learning about these types of principles into a deeper understanding of the role the system have and for a whole host of benefits. And I think that's a really great way to bring these ideas to a larger audience and to really get consumers or purchasers, for example, to support it. I say purchasers because this is a market-driven initiative. And so one of the challenges we've been looking at is how do you actually help a purchaser make a decision? Right now in a supply chain, it's very, very difficult for purchasers to actually see what a farmer or rancher is doing on the ground. And that limit in the transmission of information to a purchaser might even impede a purchasing decision, right? And so one of the things that the group has been working on is taking all of that work, taking the type of farming operation that a farmer rancher might have, taking the certifications that they have, taking whatever plans that they might have, taking things that relate to land tendency and other themes, and rolling all of that into a dashboard that can actually show what's happening in the land so purchasers can support that. Jessica, what has been the importance of gathering this information for this tool, and what have been the challenges that your team has encountered along the way?
Yeah, I mean, as you kind of stated in the beginning, Douglas, place is really central to Regen 1, not only in how we tailor our management questions in our onboarding tool or how we measure success regarding outcomes, but we're actually asking growers about the place that they farm. Not just where it is, GPS coordinates on a map, but what it's like, what it's known for, what they feel is unique about it, or what connects them deeply to it. And then we package that information into a visual storytelling experience backed up by data that connects a consumer or a purchaser to place. Because really we, and probably many people on this call, believe that people want to feel a connection to their food, the people who grow it, and the place it's coming from, especially coming out of COVID. And, COVID has also highlighted a lot of issues in our food system, especially, these historic inequities. And from the start, we realized in Regen 1 that equity, the marketplace did a poll of industry and found that equity was one of the top 3 issues that they wanted to support. But currently, there's no way to identify and support BIPOC farmers in the food supply. There's the food supply chain, sorry. There's no way to identify who's been historically underserved, who's had problems with land tenancy, as you mentioned. And if we can't identify them, we can't support them as well as we'd like to. And that goes broadly for regenerative growers across the board. But we also know that we need to really be focused on equity. But we've realized kind of in the first couple of meetings that was outside the purview of our measurement group. So we had an additional work stream, and obviously a 6-month accelerator wasn't enough time to hammer out all the details. We're still working on it, but it's at the top of the mind for all of us. I think really starting to put together not just the biophysical of regenerative, but the place connection, the appellation, which you'll talk about in a moment, making sure that we're paying attention to equity and inclusion issues, and really broadening this to a more holistic picture.
Yeah, this regenerative purchasing dashboard, this onboarding tool, will be used with 100 farmers and ranchers in the region that we're currently in the process of onboarding. We are building it and hope to have a first release of it by the end of March, beginning of April of 2021. Will be in English and Spanish. It's really an attempt to take a cross section of producers in the region and to get them onto a tool so that purchasers can have greater visibility. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. We've talked an awful lot about place so far, and place is really important when you think at the last great framing for purchasing in food was really organic certification. And even after 20-something years, it really is only about 1% of total acreage in the United States. A lot of things happened with organic in the beginning, and one of them was as companies became national, as small regional organic players got rolled up into national ones, the idea of place was stripped out of that definition of organic, and an opportunity for customers to support something that not only was value driven, but was also connected to something in their own backyard. It became slightly, in a way, disconnected. The wine industry had always had a very great way to explain the importance of place, and they developed an appellation model. And we put together a group work stream in this accelerator that focused just on place. And really, if you could say that the last 20 years was getting people to understand that they should eat local, what we're really saying is that you should eat the change you want to see in the world. One of the things that we're hoping with Regen 1 is that consumers can understand that if they have all these ideas that they want to see in terms of water, air, land, climate, that actually food purchases from producers in your region can probably be one of the most direct actions you can take. Also, by making something that's place-based, you can have more deeper commitments to communities. You can connect people to where they are. Finally, as Jessica mentioned just now, there's an increasing awareness that in many cases, the people that are farming land weren't the first people that were there. We need to acknowledge not only native lands, but the indigenous origins of the people that were here before us. And wouldn't it be great if a purchasing tool could give you a sense of that and help to tell that story? That's one of the things that we are trying to develop in this accelerator. We have two members of the Appalachian group with us today. The first is Ann Diggs. And Ann, I think I need to release my screen because I think you wanted to share your screen. Is that correct?
Hi, Douglas. Thank you. I'll share my screen, not on this first question. On the next one would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because my first question was, you know, one of the core principles of Region 1 is that regenerative agriculture is local. Why does place matter so much when we talk about regenerative agriculture?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, everybody. And I'm really proud to be part of this group. I think a lot of us have already talked about place a little bit, and you've outlined it here. But being a part of the Appalachian group, I just want to back up to storytelling. Storytelling is really enjoying a moment right now. It's a marketing buzzword we've all been inundated with, and it's really the holy grail of consumer connection, and rightly so. People want to be entertained. Our capacity for idea consumption and entertainment is limitless, and throw a little education into that mix and it's a win-win. So we really think it's the perfect time to introduce the concept of appellation in the US. It's broadly recognized, in Europe and other places, but in the US, while it technically does exist, it's kind of slow out of the gates. But when consumers are connected to the backstory of a product, they're much more inclined to supportive. We know this. Consumers are much more mindful. They want the food coming into their houses to be healthy for them and their family, and they also want it to be healthy for the planet. Especially now where we've had this time to really think about what matters while we isolate in our little bubbles. So if we can conjure the idea of appellation in a consumer's mind, really create a story that connects them to the place on an emotional level, even a visceral one, through firsthand knowledge or through this imagined experience, then it creates an exciting opportunity to really pivot the consumer's thinking and nudge them in the direction of food purchases. And hopefully that will circle back to an increased demand for regeneratively produced product. So to answer your question, place matters immensely, not only from the biophysical parameters that define what can be grown, the soil, the water resources, the climate, but the human imprint of how things are grown really has a huge impact and value proposition for the consumer. What are the farming practices? How is the land stewarded? Are there cultural and historical traditions that are honored? Are there animals being treated ethically? Is there equitable labor arrangements and blind hiring? Is there knowledge sharing within the community? All of these things are really chapters in the whole story of appellation that we want to tell. We want to get out there because we know it really creates a compelling story for consumers to hear.
Thanks, Ann. Pablo Muñoz Ledo is also a real core member of this Appalachian group. Pablo, maybe you can talk about some of the ways your group has defined place and how you framed that definition.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me here. Let me share my screen now and show you images that I'd like you to see as I answer this question. So Appellation is not new as a concept, and actually the wine industry has been using it in America for a long time. But in Europe and other parts of the world, that is a very interesting part of the culture. So people appreciate place, people appreciate where things come from, and there's almost 2,000 different geographically protected names, and they stand for a way of doing things. They stand for tradition, for a very particular species, and a way of preparing things, and culture, history. And it really brings a lot of value to products produced in these places. Now, in Region 1, we are revisiting this concept. I would say trying to update it and make it a lot more holistic. So now we are looking at the value of place from all of these concepts, but also from a more earth and human sort of way of looking at things. So place is also how regenerative this place is. How are people, how are watersheds being treated? How is biodiversity here? And all of these concepts are not necessarily in the traditional concept of appellation, but we want to include them. We want to really have a holistic view of how humans interact with nature in a particular ecosystem, and what happens when this interaction is done. What happens to life, all life, as a result of this. So this is the view we have about place, a lot more holistic and complete.
Thanks, Pablo. I guess that's a good segue, to Anne, because Anne, you and the group have been really working on how you create I would say, an integrated strategy for how to bring together people in a region and how to do that storytelling everywhere from farmers markets to supermarkets. And maybe you could share with us a little bit about your storytelling strategy that your group has been putting together.
Sure. This is where I want to share a screen, Douglas. So
I think you just go down to the bottom and click share screen.
Someone else is using it. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, it all starts with story. We are, here we go. We're looking to shift consumer mindset and really teach them about appellation. And for this to happen, we need to harness all the touch points possible so that the entire experience is a long, enlightening, and entertaining process.
We had something on the screen, but now we just see black.
You don't see me?
I think, no, we don't see what was on your screen. We had it, you clicked on something, and then we lost it.
Let me try
I think
again.
when you went to full screen, we lost it.
You got me now?
Maybe if you stop
There it is.
sharing and
I'll
start
over.
again. Yeah.
Sorry for the technical gremlin here.
There we go. Okay.
Okay. So anyway, we've started, how are we going to tell the story? It starts with a visual language. We've created this modular system, which consists of a naming block and a set of icons to really describe in a visual language an appellation. This is potentially an open source global language. It will be used across the entire supply chain, from the onboarding tool that you saw that Jessica spoke of, to the distributor, the marketplace, and beyond. At this point, we have about 70 icons here that really describe an appellation. We describe the physical parameters, we describe the regenerative farming practices, and also the regenerative social practices that we've talked about before, the ethical wages, the knowledge sharing, the history. So this is what we start with. This is ground zero. And we'd like to see this roll out across the board. We can see it in the marketplace, on shelves, and at point of purchase. What's great about this system is it's scalable. So you can use just the naming block, for instance, if you want to just quickly point to a producer, or you can create the whole, you can use the entire language, which we look at as a sort of a unique fingerprint for a producer. And what we're doing here is we're really meeting the consumer where they are. If they want to seek more knowledge, they can. They can go to the farmer's website and check out, what all of these things mean. What are the practices they're employing? We'd like to see this on packaging. We'd like to see this at CSAs. There's so many opportunities to really educate a consumer about all of these practices. The farmer's market is one of the best places that I can imagine, to educate. We'd also like to see it on wearables to create sort of this homegrown pride around your own appellation. And we'd also like to see it obviously in restaurants and eateries, cafes, lots of opportunities to celebrate appellations, what's going on in a certain place where things are sourced. And in education, there are great opportunities in the curriculum, both in the classroom and outside in teaching gardens. This is just a small sampling of opportunities on where we can share our story. It really is inviting, and we feel like this storytelling is really essential to sharing the whole notion of appellation, which can create more demand for, regenerative product. Thanks,
Anne. Pablo, you have an amazing tool that your company makes called Look Into. It was what led us to first seek you out. It was amazing to find out that you actually were in Northern California. And maybe you can share a little bit about how some of the things that Anne and the team have put together in terms of a visual language can end up in a number of unexpected ways. At the beginning of this conversation, you guys, we had asked you to take out your cameras and take a picture of the screen. That's because Pablo has developed a mobile device that can actually take information from Region 1 and actually create an interactive experience from that. Maybe, Pablo, you can share some of that with us.
Yeah, sure. So in case you didn't, take that, just point your camera at this QR code and follow the prompts. It will ask you to download something, and that's the into viewer. And after that, then you will be able to have this experience. In case you don't want to do it, or you will do it later, I will do the same in my phone. So what you're looking at here is my phone. And so, yeah, what we created is a way to visualize Region 1 information. So everything that producers, all the data collected from producers on the framework is going to be easily visualized by consumers and professional buyers. So consumers, all they have to do is click on one batch on, digital devices, or even scan the product as you are going to do right now, and they will get this information. So if right now you go ahead and scan any of these open the Into app like I am doing right now, and then you point your camera to any of those two images. And the reason there are two images is whether you have the product or whether you are in having lunch or in any place where you can see an image of telling you the story, it will be the same. If you scan and if you point your camera at any of these and just take a snapshot, that it will use image recognition in both cases to tell you the basics about this story. In this case, the appellation is Northern Sacramento, and then you have this image. You just swipe, you get a general, idea of where this is. You keep going, and then these are the same icons, the same language that's being used from the framework, from the data collection module. Producers are uploading their own information, and they will be sharing all this, and we turn this into a story that consumers can see. So it's first voice storytelling. It's nothing, it's producers telling their own story about regenerative practices. So you have different aspects, and the visual language, as Anne showed, is the same. You go through different frames, and you have resources like video, for example, and images, audio, and all of this happens on your device, on your mobile device, as you are, looking at the story. And then when you have this superficial or very basic experience, you can learn more and go directly to the whole information in the framework for that particular producer, that particular farm. And this all happens in your mobile device, and this all happens just through image recognition. So it's very immediate experience.
Pablo, one of the there's a number of amazing things, obviously, about what you've done. But one of the amazing things about it is that you've built a templatable storytelling system with Look Into that literally, if we can get producers to put in a little bit of information, some words, some photographs into the onboarding tool, it can automatically generate this for them coming out of the other end. Maybe you can explain that a little bit, because it really is, I think, it's under the hood, but it's one of the most powerful things about what you've managed to put together.
Yes, well, we care a lot about first voice storytelling. So producers, like Jessica mentioned, they take a lot of time and effort whenever data is collected. So we want our framework to really capture every aspect of their work and take that from them and convert it into stories that consumers can see, buyers, professional buyers can see, educational institutions can see. So everybody will be in contact with what producers are doing. And this is happening in an automated way. As long as producers share those images and those texts and videos in their onboarding tool, then we can share them with everybody else.
Great. Thanks a lot, Pablo. I'm going to share my screen again. Elizabeth, when we began the project, as I said at the beginning of our presentation, is that this is a market-driven model. One of our theories is that if the market doesn't support something, it doesn't really matter. But it's kind of a problem that you have to approach from two sides. You have producers who are doing things, but if the marketplace doesn't know about it, how can they support it? And you have the marketplace wanting to support things, but they don't know who to purchase from that is in line with their values are. So it's really one of these challenges. We're trying to approach that in two ways, as we've said, and as everyone has explained. One is by building a supply chain tool, a dashboard that can help a producer share with the purchaser what they're doing. Second, with an integrated communication strategy to raise everybody's literacy so that they are more aware of what it is that they should want to support. Nobody knew what a cage-free egg was, but the first time they saw that on a carton of eggs, they suddenly realized that there were eggs from chickens in cages and eggs from chickens that weren't in cages. They were given a chance. That opaque supply chain, that opaque marketplace suddenly became more transparent, and people voted for eggs that came from chickens out of cages. And so if we can raise people's literacy, the work of Pablo and Anne's group is really about that. We can put them in a better position to support the food system that they want to see. But the marketplace group, which includes 5 food service companies, Whole Foods, regional suppliers, wholesalers, and Climate Collaborative, Anthony Myint and Restore California, who's here with us today, really was looking at how do they create a coalition of the willing and the able among regional purchasers. How do they figure out a way to identify who these producers are and a way to support them? And then one of their biggest and from the very beginning, highest priority goals was how do they transition acres to regenerative? It's not about preaching to the converted. It's about even getting conventional producers on that journey towards regenerative. And lastly, how can they frame that with premiums and purchase commitments? Here with us today is Doniga Markegard, a rancher in Northern California. And I guess, Doniga, to start with you, I'm sure you are well aware that supply chains often don't really convey what you're doing on your land. And I'm wondering, how do you explain that to purchasers?
Yeah, well, I would say the most ideal way, and I would echo what Anne said, is storytelling, and first person verification is always the best. And we're situated right here in the coastal Bay Area, so typically we have a lot of ranch tours. We're sort of have this open door policy. We've been selling grass-fed beef for over 15 years in this area direct. So just a simple Google search, you'll see lots of images and stories and videos and documentaries. So, but a lot of farmers and ranchers aren't great at telling their own stories. So I'm grateful for folks like you all that are helping to pull those stories out and to get those images and messaging out there. And then secondly, we do hold certifications. So those are important. So we're certified by the American Grass-Fed Association. We're working on our Audubon sort of bird habitat friendly certification. And then, so all of these things are great for the consumer and the supply chain to see that, that we are doing these things and we are certified and we are adhering to certain practices, but also is the data and the science. So we work closely with Point Blue Conservation Science, and it's great to have them and be part of their rangeland monitoring network, because that's where that real data comes into play. So being able to sort of overlay that data on the different ranches and see like how much carbon is being sequestered, how many species of birds are thriving on these rangelands, percentage of perennials. So all of that really comes into play and is important.
Great, thanks, Doniga. Jonathan Kaplan is with Compass, and also one of the leaders of this marketplace group. At the very beginning, Jonathan, you guys put together a survey to try to get a sense of where everyone's heads were at on the purchasing side. Did you learn anything that you didn't expect from that survey?
Hey, Douglas, thanks for having me. Yeah, so this was a small scale survey. It went out to about 30 food companies, including a lot of large companies, but the group was definitely dominated by food service. And I was kind of expecting the worst, because we were asking food service companies about, a premium product and their potential commitment to it at a time when, they were all facing economic trauma from the pandemic. A lot of our businesses have been decimated by the outbreak. But we were pleasantly surprised to find a lot of engagement and a lot of enthusiasm for what we're trying to do here. I'd say one of the key findings is that these companies, by and large, want to see a clearly defined program. A lot of them want third-party verification. They want to be able to trust that experts have gotten together and figured out what regenerative means and how to find it in the marketplace. I think that's like an overwhelming area of alignment. When we asked them, what's most important to you in all this? Like, we gave them a long list of the benefits that we know come from regenerative agriculture. And we asked them to pick out the ones that were most important to them. And I was sort of expecting climate change to be the top of the list. But actually what came out at the top was sustainable farming practices. That was the number one benefit that these companies wanted to see. Climate change was a priority. It was number two. And there are lots of others that people recognize. Surprisingly, soil health did not rank very highly. That was pretty far down the list. So we have work to do to promote that in the industry. We also learned that place. We talked a lot about Appalachian today, and that does resonate. These companies were excited about the prospect of getting local agriculture, but they were also excited about place-based agriculture, even if it was far away, if there was a good story about the place. If you just gave them a name of a distant place, they weren't so excited. What else? We asked them about willingness to pay for a premium, and we got sort of a middling response on that, like 6 out of 1 to 10 scale. So that's not bad, I would say, considering where this industry is right now. We definitely have maybe more potential on the retail side. So there's lots of potential for us to be expanding our network from our existing companies.
Thanks, Jonathan. Anna Bobot is also one of the leaders of this group, and she's from LinkedIn. One of the things that has been the goals of the marketplace group is to get them in block to create greater awareness, greater alignment, to direct purchasing to support the practices that they want to see. And what is your thoughts on that evolving idea? Can companies banding together have that impact in a region?
So short answer, yes. Thank you for having me. And for those that might not have the full context as to why LinkedIn would be here, a lot of large tech companies that have on-site dining services and outlets like restaurants or cafes, they partner with food service companies to be able to order the large volumes of food, to cook the food and serve the food, which is the case for LinkedIn. We have multiple partners, food service partners around the world. I think the high level thing to take away here is that with purchasing power, because we buy in such high volume, with the purchasing power that we all have, like large companies like ours, comes the potential for change. I think together tech companies can have a huge impact with their buying power, as well as leveraging their food service vendors' buying power as well. Due to COVID, things are very slow for a lot of food service companies and tech companies around the world. And I think one silver lining, if you could look at it that way, would be that it's really good time to look at contracts and sourcing requirements that are in your food service vendor contracts, especially those that are not currently operating and are creating reopening strategies and plans. Internally on the client side, or the company that hires the food service vendor side, you could create guidelines and or requirements that all of your global vendors have to adhere to. Doing that, you would also try to get buy-in and support from your internal sustainability and sourcing teams, therefore incorporating it into your contracts with your vendors. And that could be a simple first approach. And then partnering with your food service vendors, which come in all sizes, very, very large global to very small mom and pop. Definitely don't have the same capabilities with purchasing and volume allowances and things like that, but they are your partners, and they also want to do right as much as they can. So working with them to ensure that they can also meet these requirements is key, because you don't want to create these outlandish sustainability goals that your mom and pop vendors cannot meet. One other key takeaway would be, in order to audit that your vendors are doing this, is creating a requirement in any vendor performance scorecards that you might be using on a quarter-to-quarter basis. And if you're not using one, maybe it's time to think about using one on how are you managing your vendor's performance? How do you know that they're sourcing farm to fork? What audit methods do they have in place? And how can you have visibility into that? I think that's also super, super important.
Thanks, Anna. Another key member of this group is Anthony Myint. And Anthony has been really instrumental to the group in helping to frame out a number of different ways that commitments and premiums might work. Maybe, Anthony, you can share with us a few of those approaches that you've been developing as a group.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Douglas. And thanks to Regenerative Rising and everybody. As Jonathan mentioned, the first phase of the accelerator is focused on kind of commitments from large food service companies and their distribution channels. Subsequent phases will focus on, healthcare and farmers markets and supermarkets and other sectors. But so this commitment is kind of organized around food service. And so with the goal of scaling regenerative agriculture on acres and making that change, we outlined a few different impact purchasing pathways, and it's all kind of organized within kind of a simple economic framework of commitments of at least 1% of total food budget. And so this commitment was agreed upon because it meets purchasers where they're at and sort of builds off existing paradigms like 1% for the planet and Pledge 1, which has like 9,000 corporations pledged to it already. And so, whether that's a small purchaser or a multi-million-dollar purchaser, this was a realistic commitment level to begin with, and it includes a pledge to increase that commitment over time. And so the specific mechanisms are, first and foremost, to create robust demand for regenerative products by purchasing commitments. And, I think it may not be like crystal clear from some of the discussion earlier, but really some of the work of Regen 1 is expanding that definition of regenerative to include kind of incentives and demand for producers who are making progress, even if they may not have like already reached the criteria of like regenerative. It's rewarding everybody along the path. And so again, primary focus is creating demand for regenerative ingredients. There's a secondary focus, which is also a mechanism to create more supply of ingredients by funding practice implementation through grants or perhaps carbon market activities. And so, part of the reason for that is because regenerative supply chains are still developing. And so we felt it was important to create a framework that, really every single company can participate in regardless of the logistics. You can either buy the great ingredients or you can help create more great ingredients by helping to change the acres. And so just as, we're seeing like broad targets around renewable energy and things in the world, like, 50% renewable by 2025, 100% by 2030, and these kinds of targets. I think some of the goal here is also to make it possible for, corporations to move towards targets around sourcing and scaling change on acres within the supply chain also.
Thanks, Anthony. Just to follow on what you laid out, Elizabeth, one of the benefits of us focusing with this group of people today on Northern California is that we can also take advantage of a number of things that are already there. And Anthony's done a lot of work with Restore California, which takes 1% from customers at restaurants that they can sign on their bill to go into a fund. That fund then goes to fund practices. There's also a possibility that in these different models that the Marketplace Group is developing for premiums and purchase commitments, that there could be a direction of money also, a partial direction of money into Restore California. To get to what Anthony said, that importance of transitioning conventional farmers and helping them to offset the costs of that transition through specific practices. Anthony, did I accurately capture that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, there's a tendency to think of regenerative agriculture as like complicated, and there's a huge network, as you mentioned earlier, and as part of this group, of resource conservation districts, technical service providers, there's a lot of people waiting and standing by to help farmers make this transition. And really the bottleneck is money to fund those changes.
Yeah, thanks. I'm very respectful, Elizabeth, of the amount of time that we have left. I think we only have 5 minutes. Is that correct?
Sorry, Douglas, I had to find my mute button. You have 5 minutes to close out, but then you also have a breakout from 1 till 5 minutes till. Yeah. So I would encourage you to use that time in whatever way you see fit.
Okay. Well, apologies to Jonathan Doniga. We were going to continue to explain the value of the supply chain tool. I think we're really getting short on time for that. But I want to repeat something that we said to Elizabeth when we first talked about doing this event, which is that we've never talked about this work with Regen 1 before publicly. We had to give this a great deal of thought about whether we should even talk about it with your group today, because it's a rapidly evolving project. It has many moving parts, And we want to be very clear that we're simply making an attempt to put this on its own feet by next spring. It's far from settled science. It's far from a settled methodology. But one thing that we do know is that we could all benefit from adaptive frameworks. We could all benefit from what we are going to be learning and coming out of with Region 1 Northern California, and how it could be very useful to other regions of the country, which is why part of our team is just focusing on the adaptive framework. How could you take everything that we've shown you today, which by the way will all be available free, open sourced under a Creative Commons license, but how can we also give you the framework so that whether you're in Hawaii or Vermont, that you could actually take what we've developed here and apply it in your own region? How could you put together your own measurement group? How could you adapt a supply chain tool? How could you take these principles of regenerative and how Northern California speaks about water, for example, and adapt it to a place like Minnesota, which has a much different relationship with water? So the adaptive framework for us is the key. We are producing three things in this accelerator. One is this regenerative dashboard, the supply chain tool, to help purchasers find producers and producers find purchasers. You could even call it a matchmaking tool. And the second one is this integrated communication strategy that Pablo and Ann shared. And lastly, an adaptive framework so that other regions of the country can take what we've learned and apply it in their own regions. If you're interested in learning more about the adaptive framework, you can contact us, and we will be having the first meetings of that group at the end of January in 2021. It's not enough just to do this in Northern California. It's been said to us by more than one person along the way, to do a regenerative project in Northern California is like shooting fish in a barrel. So, however, there's a lot of learnings that we can draw from. There is a lot of ground that people have already covered in this region. We're going to capture that in this adaptive framework. We've been doing it since day one, and we're eager to share that with other regions of the country so that they can apply these ideas and improve upon them for their own regions.
You just answered two of my questions, which is what is the key takeaway for this group, Douglas, and how can we help? I'm just so touched that we all got to hear it first. I think that's a fantastic, and this is the group that you want to talk to about it first. How would you like to, we have 15 more minutes. How would you like to use that time right now?
You know, when we created this accelerator, it started out as one group and then two, and then all of a sudden it was 6. So it takes an entire value chain. And the reason why when we started today, Elizabeth, I said to you, it's not Douglas or the lexicon that did this. I think as you learned today from all these people with very specific areas of domain expertise, it takes a lot of different skill sets, right? So I think that in your breakouts, I think that you'll continue to see even more viewpoints, more experiences that we can all draw from, and we would love to hear all of them. But yes, it's the first time we've shared it. We were even a bit reluctant to do so, but we are very hopeful that we can provide something that's useful, and also that you can give us, further insight as we continue to develop the work that will be released in the spring.